roll call, starting with President Lunaharo.
Here.
Vice President Chaput, present. Treasurer Weddle.
Here.
Secretary Lasorsa. Where was I? Oops, I lost my spot in the roll call. Chief of Staff Malai. Chief Justice Wu is excused. Vice Treasurer Hokanson, I skipped. Director of PR. Director of Wellness Inclusion is excused. Pro Tem Ludewan. Senator Beckman. Senator Fisher is excused. Senator Capo. Senator Khan is excused. Senator Novak. Senator Pena. Senator Ritchie is excused. Senator Rose. Advisor Artajani. Advisor Wadsworth. Webb. CFB. Wildcat Media. Wildcat Esports. College Council Rep was excused. SAC is not here. Res Life is not here. All right, that concludes the approval. That concludes roll call. Moving into the approval of minutes agenda. Is there any discussion? CFB.
And the minutes to 5 minutes, and then go into voting.
We have a motion to limit the discussion of the minutes and agenda for 5 minutes and then go into voting. Is there a second? Second by Pro Temp Ludewan. Going into discussion of the amendment. Is there any discussion for this? Senator Novak?
Personally, I can see it for the minutes, but I don't think we should do that for the agenda. Because at least during the Pro Temp meeting, we mentioned that there were multiple problems with the agenda, and I feel that discussion might take more than 5 minutes with how many resolutions we might need to fix it.
Alrighty. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go into voting. All those in favor of limiting discussion to 5 minutes for the minutes and agenda and go immediately into voting, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes 5-0. All right, back into the discussion of the approval of the minutes. Yes?
6 senators, you said 5-0?
There's 7. Am I wrong? Is it 4? Did I just count wrong?
3?
4-2-0? 4-2-0. Apologies, 4-2-0. Counted wrong. My math skills are dying today. All right, Treasurer Weddle.
First, just a clarification to the chair. Are we discussing the approval of the most recent minutes or today's agenda? I'd like to entertain a motion for all votes henceforth for the remainder of this meeting to be done through roll call voting. This was done last Sunday. I think it provides great accountability. We're making some very significant changes here, especially since it's not a long meeting. It just ensures that everyone's vote is captured. I yield.
So moved by Pro Tem Ludewan, second by Senator Beckman. Is there any discussion for this amendment? Seeing no discussion, we'll go into voting on roll call vote. All those in favor of roll call vote, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes 4-0. Never mind, College Council Rep is here. All right, back into discussion of the minutes and agenda. Is there any further discussion for today's minutes and agenda? Senator Novak.
Motion to suspend House Rules Article 11, Section 2, I believe it is, the bullet point that limits discussion to 5 minutes per each member, including audience members, per piece of legislation.
A motion to suspend House rules, second by Senator Beckman. Going to discussion of the motion. Is there any discussion for this motion? Seeing none, we'll go into voting, starting with Senator Capo. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down for all of these votes going forward. Thank you. Senator Pena? Thumbs up, thumbs up. Senator Rose? Senator Beckman? Senator Novak? And Pro Temp Ludewan. All right, that passes unanimously. Going back into discussion of the minutes and agenda, is there any further discussion? Senator Beckman.
Old business to the bottom of new business.
We have a motion to move old business to the bottom of new business. Is there a second? Sent by Senator Capo. Going to discussion of the amendment. Is there any discussion? Treasurer Weddle.
We made very good headway on the financial policy last meeting. I am confident that we can finish discussion on it today. Realistically speaking, I don't think we're going to get through the vast majority of our new business to begin with. It would be nice to, at the very least, finish something today. There's, for context, there's only, please hold, there's only three articles remaining, one of which was extensively discussed last time. I can't imagine it'll take very long. The other two articles are relating to inventory, asset control, enactment, and then we have the appendices with some forms. I'm not anticipating a lot of discussion. None of the senators or members of the Horseshoe have approached me with concerns about any of those articles aside from what was discussed last Sunday in respect to Article 13, stipends. So I guess I'm just very confused as to why the Senate is so believing that we cannot make it through this bill rather promptly. It's the second week, so it allows us to vote on it this week. It saves it from having to be on the agenda next week, saving us about 70 pages or so. It really should be a quick discussion. I yield.
Pro Tem Ludowan?
The reasoning for moving this below new business is because the election bill really needs to be passed. Well, we need to discuss it at least today, because to call it out, as current policy states, the vice president is still kind of in charge of the election. The vice president is running in the election, so the Senate thinks that it's more important to fix election policy right now, and we can obviously come back to financial policy at some point in time. I yield.
Senator Novak?
Along with this, Article 13 will probably end up being a 30-minute discussion at minimum. At least most likely, with talks I had with some senators afterwards, there was still discussion that's going to be held onto that, and we're probably going to discuss that at least a long bit, and because of that, we won't be able to get to election policy most likely, so that will take up a majority of our meeting time.
Alrighty, the 5 minutes has passed, so we're going to voting. Since we are currently in a amendment, we're going to vote on the amendment and then go and voting on the minutes in general as a whole. So starting with the amendment to, could you repeat the amendment made? All right, on regards to that, starting with Senator Capo. All right, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, and Pro Tem Ludowan. That passes unanimously. Now on to votes of the minutes and agenda as a whole, starting with Senator Capo. All right, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak. Yeah. Correct, but the motion made before was 5 minutes for both the minutes agenda and vote, so it's for both. And Pro Tem Ludowan? All right, that passes also unanimously. That concludes the approval of minutes and agenda. Moving on to announcements, starting with SUNY SA.
Good morning, everybody. SUNY SA for the spring is going to happen April 10th to April 12th. I'll be sending out an email to everybody in SGU who would like to attend. These are interest forms. By applying for these interest forms does not guarantee that you will attend, but we will look at your application and decide fairly to ensure that everybody has an equal chance to attend. Please look out for your email right now. I will send the interest form. Try to fill this out as soon as possible. The earlier, the better. And yeah, that's about it.
Alrighty, that concludes announcements. Moving on to guest speakers. There are no guest speakers. Moving on to executive reports, starting with President.
Give me 1 second. Hello again. Just a few report on my end. The Center of Business is doing a business plan competition. The deadline to apply is this Sunday, 8th of March. If you'd like to participate, this is a big Mohawk Valley event. I think this is a good opportunity for everybody. The application is Sunday, 8th of March. You'll see the posters around campus. We need one student to represent for the student pillar meeting. This pillar meeting is regarding campus infrastructure, ideally a senator. The problem with this is the meeting is going to be 17 March. This is during spring break. If any of you is staying here during spring break and you are a senator, if you're not a senator, you can still represent the student voice during this meeting, but it's going to be 17 March. If you can attend, please let me know. Shoot me a message, telegram, email, or anything, and I will add you to the invite. The Volleyball Senior Day Game event is March 7th, 2 p.m. this Saturday. Please come. The regalia request is due by March 11th, so if you are applying for that, please send in your application before that. Besides that, all projects are underway, and hopefully we would have something exciting after spring break. Thank you.
All right, moving on to the Vice President report. Hello, everyone. It's been operation as usual. All right, moving on to the Treasurer report.
Things have been going well over on the Treasury side of things. Budget Committee is full speed ahead, and I'll talk about that more when I get to the Budget Committee report. Currently, the Vice Treasurer and I are looking into what funds were allocated or budgeted or available for this year that haven't really been utilized as we get towards the end of the spring semester. March and April will go by very quickly, and we just want to make sure that we're using everything that's available. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
All right, Secretary report. All right, that concludes executive reports. Moving on to Director reports, starting with Chief of Staff. All right, Director of PR. Just keep going.
Some of the biggest things we've been working on throughout the past couple of weeks is getting our TikTok platform established, and we finally launched it recently, so that's good. And we've also received the materials for the long-awaited nameplates, so all that remains is getting them cut. I yield to you.
Alrighty. College Council, do you have a report today? All right. Our advisor, Art Tajani.
Thank you. Just real quick, we do have a collaborative event with Web on March 23rd. Is that me? Okay.
Advisor Wadsworth. Alrighty. That concludes director reports. Moving on to committee reports, starting with Policy Committee. Hello, everyone. We've started looking at constitutional updates, and we'll continue going forward from there. Our meetings are in Kinsella, A 219, if I remember correctly. And they're on Mondays 6 to 7. That is all. Thank you. Budget Committee.
Year rather is being worked on still. We've received and gone through all of the organization requests. This upcoming Tuesday, we're going to start balancing the budget, which is always the fun part when we have to make sure that all of these requests match what we actually have. As previously noted, the financial policy is on the table. Stipends article notwithstanding, I'm not expecting a lot more discussion on it, so hopefully that can be wrapped up next week. I yield.
All right, student success. All righty. Student Center Advisory.
Hello, I'm giving a report today as our committee chair could not make the meeting. Last week, the committee focused on facility updates, including exploring a smart locker cabinet for the game room equipment and getting pricing to refit the pool tables. They are still waiting on facilities for estimates on the late night lounge renovation and the possible placement of the food court LED screen with a TV. Facilities confirmed that engraved benches cannot be stained, so they are already sealed and waterproofed. A work order was submitted to repair loose Lido chairs and address accessibility concerns. Open forum topics include the broken airflow of the ice hockey table and missing or damaged charging stations in the student center. We'll be meeting again, same time tomorrow in the SC Theater.
Alrighty. Wellness and inclusion.
Stools for students to rent in order to support those with medical conditions and injuries. The committee contacted the Wellness Center and Director of Accessibility Services and discussed how shower stools can be made available for students who need them. The Wellness Center will be making the purchase for the shower stools. I yield.
Alrighty. Food committee.
Having a meeting today, 4 to 5 of the students in the theater, like usual. Hope to see people there. I yield.
Safety and facilities.
No put.
All right. Class gift.
We finalized the specific items and their amounts to be included in this year's class gift, and we're waiting to receive a final price quote on them. We've begun drafting a resolution and hope to have it on the table soon.
All right. That concludes committee reports. Moving on to organizational reports, starting with Webb.
Very busy weekend coming up. We have bowling today, Free Ski Friday tomorrow, as well as our free movie Scream 7 starting Friday that goes till Sunday. And a reminder, please don't purchase your tickets online. And next week we have semi-perm tattoos on the 10th from 12 to 2 and diamond art painting on the 12th from 12 to 2 as well. I yield.
All right. CFB.
Operation. I yield.
Wildcat Media.
Wildcat Media has our event tomorrow at 7 p.m. in the SCMPR. Please come join us. And besides that, we've been currently operating as normal. I yield.
Wildcat Esports. All right, that concludes organizational reports. Moving on to the approval of the change log. There are no changes to approve. Moving on to new business, resolution 2526-22. Can I have the pro temp read this?
Accept resolution number 2526-22.
Is there a second? Second by Senator Beckman. You can continue.
We, the Senate of the Student Government at SUNY Poly, do hereby resolve. Sorry. Yes, please. Whereas there are less than optimal number of senators in operation, and whereas several committees are at minimum attendance, and whereas an internal hiring process took place, therefore be it enacted. I apologize if I say the name wrong. Sirat Fatima will be appointed as an acting senator, and enacted Sirat Fatima will fill an open position for senator, therefore be it resolved. Sirat Fatima will act as an additional representative for their class year, and be it further resolved, Sirat Fatima will serve as an acting senator until the spring executive election, and be it further resolved, the student body of SUNY Poly will be better represented, and be it finally resolved, the SGU Senate will be able to operate at a more effective level.
All right. Going to discussion on the resolution. Senator Novak.
I don't know if our candidate is here, but if our candidate is here, I would like to direct a question to them, if I can. If a candidate's here, the question is, this contract is set to expire at the end of the election, but would you be comfortable having it extended to the end of the academic year?
Is our candidate here today? No. Yeah. Correct. Seeing as the candidate is not here as a present, can I ask for a motion to be made to table this back to next week? So moved by Pro Tem Ludewan, second by Senator Novak. Going discussion on tabling this resolution to next week. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll go into voting on tabling this back to next week, starting with Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, and Pro Tem Ludewan. That passes unanimously. Alrighty, moving on to bill number 2526-18. Sorry, give me a second. Senator Pena.
25.
You can continue.
Members of the student government at Unica at SUNY Poly, as represented in the Senate, do hereby enact as follows: to provide the student government of Utica with an updated, well-outlined, collected, and straightforward policy and procedure outlining referendums and elections. Multiple sections within the SU policies and procedures conflict on the operations of an election. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right. We're in discussion. Before we get into full discussion, this is not the most updated of this bill, so I will send the most updated version of this bill out to the horseshoe. But we're going to start with Senator Novak.
I would like to make a motion to mark this for immediate action if I can.
We have a motion to mark for immediate action. Is there a second? Sent by Senator Rose. Moving in discussion on marking for immediate action, Senator Novak.
The election starts today, so if we are going to want this to affect this election, I think we need to pass it today, because I don't know if we can change policy for elections mid-election.
So just a point of information, if it's not passed today and it's, say, like passed next week, it can happen in the middle election. It is then up to the election committee what way they feel to go forward with the election, just as a general information. Okay, I have today's agenda, so let me just send this out to everyone, the updated bill. And I would like to hand over the chair to CFB if they accept. All right.
Is there any discussion on the motion at hand? Our treasurer.
The first time that we've been able to discuss this bill, given what our vice president said in regards to, realistically speaking, it not actually affecting the election in the sense that election committee will be able to judge how to best proceed in their handling of the election if this passes, say, next week. I don't see the need for this to be voted on today. The election starts today regardless. That doesn't change whether or not this passes today or next week. I yield.
Pro Temp Ludewan.
Kind of respond to that, bringing back my earlier statement, where technically, as current policy states, the vice president still has to oversee all the documents that come in for the election. Given that the candidacy period actually does start today, I don't think we would want the vice president, who is ideally running in the election, to be overseeing other candidates' stuff. So that's why I think it's more important to get it done today than pushing it off. I yield.
Our East Forest representative.
President Ludewan brings up a really important point, but in addition, I don't think it's right to have to do a policy adaptation in the middle after you've already started learning how to run the election. I think it would just be much easier if we started off with the new policy, if possible.
Our Vice President.
Currently, as our election policy outlines, it's actually not inclusive to transfer students, and our elections are supposed to be open and inclusive to everyone. Transfer students can't actually ever run for president or vice president, because if you think about it, they transfer from community college, and they're supposed to have 2 full semesters at SUNY Poly. But if you think about that, their 4th year when they're graduating, they're not going to run because they're graduating, so they effectively can't ever run. So to conclude my statement, I'd like to make a motion to call to question, if I can have that entertained.
Seconded by Senator Novak. Going into Is there no discussion? Okay, going into voting, Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Senator Pro Temp Ludewan. That passes 5-1-0. Now going to voting on the motion to mark for immediate attention. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Temp Ludewan. That passes unanimously. Now on to discussion for the bill. Okay. Our web representative.
Can I make a motion to remove bullet point under, it's the 8th bullet point under 14.6.0 stating any student removed from any past or present election at SUNY Poly may be unable to run for an electable position within SGU unless appealed by a majority approval of election committee, and all of its sub-bullet points since it discourages student participation.
There is a motion seconded by Senator Now, is there a second? Seeing no second, that motion dies. Continuing discussion on the bill. Senator Novak.
Kind of just to counter the point that was just made, if I can. Currently, under election policy, we don't have anything, I think, that really discourages or prevents people who have been removed from elections in the past from running again. And this kind of is a bit of a breach of security in a way, because it does allow you, if, say, you get removed in the spring election due to any reason, you can then run again in fall, assuming that position's still open during the Senate elections. So say we have someone run for secretary, they get removed for whatever reason that's deemed valid by election committee and it's withheld by the Senate. Then in the Senate election, they can run for secretary if that position is still open, basically making it so them being removed from the election had no effect, and there's no reason to, or no way to prevent people who were deemed rightfully removed from participating, which, depending on the reason for removal, could be problematic, especially if they were removed for things such as election fraud or other serious charges. I yield.
Our treasurer.
Senator Novak to the other point that's under these restrictions, stating that, I apologize, people who have been found responsible by the conduct office for impeding or coercively tampering with or coercively influencing the SU election process shall be unable to run for a period of 1 academic year following the conclusion in which the infraction occurred. This effectively allows for, if there's
current election policy that I had sent out. As I said, it was not an updated election policy bill.
President, I guess I'm very curious as to when and why that was changed. That was not a change that was discussed in committee. I think it's extremely disingenuous to suggest this bill was submitted by policy committee if the bill has received edits that are not exactly insignificant after the fact. I yield to our Vice President to respond.
Yeah, sure. So the reason was, as I, of course, have to check with our advisors what is allowed and what is not allowed. And it was come to a general consensus that you can't actually overrule the SUNY Poly Code of Conduct. So we can't limit to only 1 year. We can't be held to that policy, so that policy can't even be in here.
Our treasurer.
Clarify to our Vice President, this is only for those who are found responsible to tampering with, impeding, or coercively influencing. The conduct office's sanctions that they impose for someone being found responsible of that violation doesn't necessarily mean that they can't run again. I don't know. There are students who have been found responsible for that charge, and they have not been told, at the very least, that they're not able to run in any future election. So this is a policy that we make. If the conduct office decides to assign sanctions that prohibits participation in student government, for example, running in an election, they can do so, and we have to follow that. But if they don't assign that sanction, this allows us to have cover through a much more documented and rigorous process than was someone previously removed from an election. I yield back to our Vice President.
This is in the case that we don't want to bottleneck ourselves into too much policy. The policies need to be open enough so that they can encompass pretty much any situation. In the case that the conduct board, who knows, there may be a case that they somehow just forget that they can put a sanction on. It might happen, it might not. I mean, we trust that it doesn't, but there's always a chance it might. So in this case, there is still an appeals process that candidates who are removed can go through. So that is already a fail-safe that is in there, meaning that we shouldn't put in policy that we may have to break when we can just have the policy that's already covered in there. There's an appeals process. We don't need to add anything in addition to the appeals process because otherwise we might start bottlenecking ourselves.
Senator Novak?
Question for our advisors. I know we're not supposed to be able to have any access to the conduct information or any sort of information that goes to the conduct cut. So if we were even to do a limitation saying if you were found guilty of a conduct case, you can't run for a year, would election committee even be able to legally get the information as that's conduct information and therefore out of our scope? I yield to our advisors if I can.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have spoken to our conduct officer, Brittany Morowitz. It would go underneath the same as we do with grade points averages. So it would be by my staff or probably myself, and it would just be a matter of whether the individual is in good standing with conduct or not. So there would be no specifics of what case is in front of conduct, the disposition of conduct, anything like that. It would just be verification of whether they're in good standing. So no, the students would not have access to that, just like you don't have access to determine whether someone meets the grade point average. So that would be done through CSI. I yield.
Our Vice President?
And actually, just to kind of add on to that as well, this is also the reason why in that same bullet point that we're talking about, it has to be unanimous approval, because if the students are not allowed to know that information, the SU advisor is a voting delegate, meaning that if all the students who don't have privy to that information, they don't have enough information to really make that vote, so they say all approve, then the SU advisor who does and is privy to that information can make the proper vote to, decide accordingly with all the knowledge needed. I yield.
Our Treasurer?
To our Vice President's earlier comment, conduct cases can be served to individuals who are not running in an election but are still interfering with, tampering with, or impeding an election. Election Committee does not have a way of recourse against these individuals, but as has certainly happened in the past, people have been found responsible for conduct charges of tampering with or impeding an election. If we're concerned with regards to, these students being able to run again, then I think we should be going towards a broader process. I do think it's a little ridiculous to suggest that the conduct office would forget about the sanctions that are available to them, or that the conduct office is a less well-documented, well-maintained, well-regulated, and operated process compared to our own election committee. All of our senators have been in committees. Some of them are running really well, some of them not necessarily so. Committees change year to year. The makeup of these committees change year to year. I don't understand, I suppose, why we think an election committee would have a better job of, making these determinations compared to the conduct office. I would hope that most of the students here have looked through the Code of Conduct. It's a very extensive document. The procedures are extensive, and they go all the way up to our campus president, whereas election committee is just this committee of members, and that's it. There's no further appeals process. There's nothing documented for further reconciliation or anything. I do also want to add that with regards to the point about a unanimous approval of election committee to appeal, is that this was discussed in policy committee. It was discussed for a good amount of time with all the members of the committee, and it was changed to be majority approval. And now, having left the committee, already been put on the table just last Sunday, it's now been changed back to unanimous. So I guess I take great issue procedurally with the fact that this is nominally a bill submitted by committee, and it's since been reverted post-discussions and changes made by that committee, I yield to our Vice President.
The chair has the right to go to the advisors and make sure things are good for policy. Obviously, if the same is true for removing a candidate, which has to be a unanimous decision, it should be also true that for adding a candidate who was removed has to be a unanimous decision. Additionally, as I already stated, students aren't privy to the information of a conduct hearing, meaning that the advisor is the only one who could have that say in that meeting. So it has to be unanimous approval. That's how it was. I also want to point out that the conversation is getting a bit cyclic at this point. We're still talking about the same thing. It's been about 10 minutes, and it's still just the same back and forth conversation. I yield.
Senator Rose.
You have to raise your hand higher. I can't see.
The point that Treasurer Weddle did make is that this would not encompass perhaps students who meddled with the election but are not running in the election and thus could not be removed. I yield.
Our web representative.
I just have a question because in the requirements and restrictions, it states that candidates who have been removed from elections can't run for the rest of the year plus an additional year without appealing it. Can I ask to whoever, how many candidates have actually been removed and ran again and had to be removed for a second time for violating the expectations that candidates are held to? I yield.
Not in the current policy, that bullet point.
Senator Novak.
It's right there.
Us being a bit cyclical, but I feel like a lot of discussions basing off of the fact that our advisors would know that the conduct case charge against a candidate would be for election fraud. But at least if I understood what our advisor said correctly, they don't get to know the exact conduct thing. They just get to know that a student has a conduct against them, which means if they're looking at a student for running in the election, they can see, oh, the student has a conduct case against them that was filed and I guess went through conduct cut and upheld. That conduct case could easily be for as much fraud in an election as it could be for cussing out a teacher or going to the SC and breaking all of the hockey sticks. There's no way to tell that the conduct is specifically election-based because our advisors are not allowed to get that information. So that this muddies the water of what was the conduct case? Is it a valid thing to block them from the election? Could the conduct case have been like a mistake from years ago? Like, could the conduct case have been when they were a freshman? Did they accidentally say something offensive to another student and they've learned since and they wouldn't do it again and that wouldn't impact them as a SGU executive? So I feel like focusing so much on this information we'll never have is too much of a gray area where we're going to be stuck with these situations. They are hypotheticals for now, but for how long? I yield.
Our Vice President.
In a motion to change bullet point 1, 2, 3. Bullet point 3, instead of stating candidates for the president and vice president must complete 2 full semesters at SUNY Poly prior to announcing candidacy, to state candidates of the president and vice president must have completed 2 full semesters, semicolon, one of which must be at SUNY Poly prior to announcing candidacy. This is due to the fact that, as I stated earlier, the transfer students aren't actually allowed to. Well, they aren't able to run for president or vice president.
I'm going to cut you off there until we get into the motion. So moved by Pro Temp Ludowan, seconded by Senator Novak. Now into discussion on the motion. Our treasurer.
Misleading to state that transfers can't run for executive positions. It's just that they couldn't run for president or vice president in their first 2 semesters. If they're here for another year at SUNY Poly, they could absolutely run in the fall semester. They could absolutely run in the spring semester. All it states is that they must have completed 2 full semesters at SUNY Poly prior to announcing candidacy. If you have someone who transfers here in their second year of college, they're here for a year, why can they not run the following year? I'm going to yield to our Vice President to add some clarification.
Sure. So as the current policy is, it's 2 full semesters, meaning that they can't run in the spring. So say a community college student transfers in, right? They've completed their 2 years, meaning they only have 2 years left for their full bachelor's degree. So transfer in, got the 2 years. The first year that they're there, that's not going to get their 2 full semesters because they would have to announce candidacy before their second full semester ends, meaning that if they wanted to run for president or vice president, that would have to be in the next year. But that next year, they're graduating, and unless they plan on becoming a graduate student, they're not actually able to run in as a president or vice president. Even if there's someone who has, say, a lot of experience in their community college, and maybe they ran as president before in their community college, they're not able to run again. So this would allow so that they get the one semester during the fall semester if they transferred in at SUNY Poly, and they would already have to have previous experience with the one semester at the community college. I yield.
Our treasurer.
To that point, I suppose I feel you can still have fairly common situations where students will transfer to SUNY Poly. They have years remaining at SUNY Poly and can consequently run for office depending on when you transfer. If you're only transferring here for a year, right, you wouldn't run except for in the fall election depending on when you came in. But if you're going to be here for a couple of years, you can still run for those executive positions. The semesterly requirement for candidacy for the executive board positions has been a fairly long-standing requirement. I guess I don't quite understand as to why we feel the need to cut it down. How many situations have come up where transfers are actively seeking to run for these executive positions? How many transfer students have come to election committee, come to policy committee, come here to open forum and stated that the election policy changes you're making don't allow myself, an engaged and active student, to run? I yield back to our Vice President.
So obviously, I've only been here for 4 years, so I wouldn't know anything prior to the 4 years. I can speak to specifically this year, as our vice treasurer couldn't run for treasurer, and while that's a very specific point, I will want to make a follow-up motion after this, of course, to correct the secretary and treasurer. But to start, that's like a first example. Another example is literally any community college student who would ever have interest but only wants a 4-year degree.
Senator Beckman.
Not necessarily a numbers issue. It's the fact we're preventing people. We're not being inclusive in this thing. We shouldn't have to count how many times we deny people's inclusivity to SGU. It should just be we prevent the issue entirely. I yield.
Pro Temp Ludewan.
A lot of transfer students that do come to SUNY Poly are students that have already gotten their associate's degree, which is already completing 2 years. That means they only have 2 more years left for their bachelor's degree. And I think the main point here is to be inclusive to all students. It's not to say we don't have, to decline the, to decrease the requirements drastically, but it's more to be inclusive of everyone. I yield.
Our advisor.
Historical context on this piece of legislation, a tiny little bit. I believe this was created in spring of 2022. It hasn't been around for that long. And it's been through a couple of different renditions. I actually remember when it was created, and there was a lot of discussion around whether the secretary and treasurer should be included, if it should be 2 semesters or 1 semester, should it be 1 semester in student government before they have to run. There's been a lot of conversations about different options for it. But I would agree that we have had several students who are not eligible, whether they're in student government now or non-student government. A couple of transfer students that I've spoke with that aren't going to join student government because they don't have a way to be able to continue to grow. I think of one student in specific. She's great. But I do think that there are limitations in that it does give students some roadblock. I think that some regulations are important, but it is hard to give students such a difficult time being able to climb the ladder, if you will. I yield.
Senator Novak.
So I have a quick point against having any type of semester requirement. Not that I'm saying we get rid of it, but one of the big arguments I've heard in favor of this being a thing is it requires our students to get to know the campus and to be active on the campus before running. But my thing against that is under the current requirements, this does not impact online students who are online only, then come to campus. Because at least from my personal experience, I was an online student for 2 years before I came to campus. Under these regulations, I could have run for president my first semester. I was on campus because I came in as a spring semester, because I would have completed 2 years at SUNY Poly prior to that. And before that, I, as an online student, had no experience with SUNY Poly or any of the students on it. I would have been as clueless as a fresh transfer when it came to knowing this campus and its culture, but I would be able to run while those transfers wouldn't, so it doesn't actually preventing our president and vice president from not knowing stuff about this campus, because online students exist and online students are not barred from this. I yield.
Our East Wards representative.
Senator Novak brings up a really good point. I'd also like to refer back to our motion at hand, which is to change bullet point to say 1 semester at SUNY Poly and 1 semester in college, I believe. I think that's an acceptable motion from my perspective, because it gives the person that's running, like, we make sure that they've been at college, they have that college experience, but they've also been acclimated. I think 1 semester is, I wouldn't say it's a lot, but it's, I think, enough to get a sense of, hey, what is the SUNY Poly campus like? In addition, I don't think the 2-semester requirement is great, because if, as our vice president pointed out, if you need 2 semesters, then normally this election is held in the spring, so you haven't completed your 2nd semester, and you wouldn't run for your graduate year unless you're staying for graduate year. So I'll just promote my support for the motion again.
Senator Beckman. There's a motion to call the question, seconded by Senator Novak. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Tem Ludewan. That passes unanimously. All right, now on to voting on the motion at hand. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Senator Pro Tem Ludewan. That passes unanimously. We're back into the discussion of the bill as a whole. Our treasurer.
Questions about the bill, which I was hoping I could direct to Policy Committee. 12.5.0 states that once introduced, an initiative is considered to be the business at hand. Given that we then have 13.2.3, which states all elected within SGU are done through referendum as initiatives, how does this actually work out in practice? Because you're stating that the vice president is required to submit initiatives to the Senate business meeting, then to be immediately voted on by the Senate, and additionally all elected positions are done as initiatives through referendum. So I guess, are they voting on the election? Are they voting on the candidates? What does that look like? I yield. Sure. So that was 12.5.0, which outlines that the vice president is required to submit any initiative which is submitted to them before or during the Senate meeting. And most importantly, once introduced, an initiative is considered to be the business at hand, as containing the interests of the body of the SGU is considered already motioned and seconded. And then 12.5.1 stating that it cannot be postponed and must be voted on, suggesting that a vote is required. And then we have 13.2.3 stating all elected positions within SGU are done through referendum, specifically as initiatives. I yield to our vice president.
Range of things. For an example, initiative last year was when we were in discussion of taking on the gala. Initiative was made to make a committee that had to be voted on immediately. Now, the initiative for an election is a little bit different because the vote is done by the whole student body. The initiative is made usually as an announcement during announcements. It was discussed in our executive board that and approved by the executive board that the election was starting today. However, I didn't actually see it added onto the agenda. I can't really state to why it wasn't on the agenda, but just let that be known. It was supposed to be announced today. That is kind of where that announcement is made for the election as it stands. Yeah, it's an initiative. It's voted on by the student body. That's where they must be voted on section comes in.
Our web representative.
Quick question to the vice president. It would be an announcement, so it would be like you'd have to like say that or something. I guess my question is, in that sense that it was approved and everything, did you tell the secretary that you wanted your name on the agenda for making an announcement that the election should be open? I yield back to the Vice President.
It was under my understanding that when I gave the timeline to the executive board that says the election is starting on this date, it needs to be added to agenda. That was just my understanding. I would like to honestly make the announcement in open forum, but when we get there, we get there.
Our treasurer.
Just to our Vice President, I guess I'm a little confused about then because it states that 12.5.0 states once introduced an initiative considered to be the business at hand as containing the interests of the body of the SGUs are considered already motioned and seconded. The language there implies that the initiative itself is just considered a main motion. You brought up some examples of past initiatives last year when we created a committee, an ad hoc committee for planning the gala, right? That was something that was introduced and then it was voted on, it was discussed and voted on. Given the language here, it almost seems certain that it's a main motion with its own period of discussion and voting. What does the Senate vote actually do? If the Senate votes it down, what happens to the election? If the Senate approves of it, how does that affect the election? Is there not an election committee that's already in charge of it? What amendments is the Senate allowed to make during the discussion of the initiative of the election? I yield back to the Vice President.
Didn't change from here to now. It's within the original referendums. This is not new. It says all candidates for election will be selected by initiative. If you're referring to a different spot, that I would like to know, because in the original it says an initiative may be further designated as a referendum, and so I just kind of want clarity on that. But to answer the question on the Senate voting on it or anything like that, Senate has the power to pass resolutions literally covering anything, bills covering anything referring to our policy. If they want to make any bill or resolution to how an election is done, such as an election policy that's currently being discussed, they have the power to do that.
Our treasurer.
It used to state at the end of it, initiative may be further designated as a referendum, and this is the sort of thing where I would imagine, an election requiring to be done as initiative, that would be sort of the perfect situation where you designate it as a referendum because the election itself needs to be done through a referendum to the entirety of the student body. With regards to this having previously been there, it was my understanding that election committee and later policy committee was looking to make substantial changes to fix some of the issues present in this section. To continue sort of on in a similar vein, 13.5.0, which was not in the old policy but is in the new policy, states that any referendum that will include an interview must abide by the recruitment policy further outlined in the associated appendix. I'm a little confused as to when a referendum would require an interview. A referendum is a popular vote of the student body, so the determination of that interview would not actually affect the vote because the end vote is whatever the students say, right? If the student body, 60% says we approve of this person who would otherwise require an interview, that's their decision. That's what we have to go with. The interview shouldn't be able to override that. Additionally, it's not outlined as to who would be conducting this interview. Is this the executive board? Is this election committee? Is this the chair of election committee? Is this the SU advisors? Is it something that goes to the Senate? It's just very confusing to me as to why that was included. I can't think of a single situation where we would have a referendum that additionally requires an interview, and they just seem inherently at odds with each other. If you're hiring someone, you do an interview. If you're electing someone, that's the process. They get voted on, they get elected. I yield.
Our Vice President.
As for the strikeout in 12.5.1, that strikeout is re-seen through 13.2.0, bills, resolutions, and initiatives may be further designated as a referendum. Along with the crossed out of 13.9.0 is literally the same thing as 13.5.0 with the taking out of the associated appendix, as the appendix number may change in time, so that wanted to be left open. For the example that I was given for when this would be the case is if the Constitution is updated and a position that is not an elected position is put in, so that to be added in as a hireable position, and the position is also then made as part of either the election or something similar to that, as constitutional changes can be passed first by the Senate and then by the general student body. that would be the case. So in the example of, say you're hiring a photographer, right? And that's labeled in your constitution as you have a photographer as a position. That position would be a hired position, and as outlined in that new constitutional change, and hired positions require an interview. So that's kind of where that would fall under. To my knowledge, the original one, 13.9.0, had never seen any use, but I figured just as a safe keep, it should be kept in policy. But that was originally in policy. That's not a change.
Our treasurer.
Here about reducing unnecessary policy, and I think that's definitely something we want to look at. I don't think a situation in which you conduct a constitutional change which adds a position and then that position requires an interview because it's hired really falls under 13.5.0. The referendum itself does not include that interview. If you're having students vote on the policy change, they're voting on the policy change. If they're voting on the policy change and whether or not, Bob Jones should be chosen for that new position, now they're voting on Bob Jones and their position. The students' body's vote should be taken in that regard, and that should be the result. To the extent that we've got unnecessary policy in here, you said yourself that previously this 13.9.0, which stated pretty much the same thing, has never been used. It seems like something we would just want to cut out. I yield.
Pro Temp Ludoan. All right, Senator Novak.
Can we call the question?
There is a motion to call the question, seconded by Senator Beckman. Now going into voting. We're not in a motion, right? No. Then yeah, it's on the whole bill. All right, we're voting on the call to question. So Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Temp Ludoan. That passes 4-0. There's a motion to reconsider. Seeing seconded by Senator Rose. We're back in discussion. We're in the discussion of the motion to reconsider. Okay. Pro Temp Ludoan.
Just to the Senate, I don't think we have discussed this enough. Considering the scope of this bill and also considering that we still have time on the table, I do not think that we should call the question on the entire legislation. I think that we still have other parts that needs to be discussed. So I think calling to question right now is a bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. Harsh decision. Sorry, English. I yield.
Senator Novak.
Call the question just because we have 15 minutes to open forum almost. And this was discussed during the pro temp meeting, so I believe this is count as public information. No? Oh. Okay, it's closed on. I'm not sure if it's the thing that you mentioned first. Can you bring that up? Or? We have to do the vote for election committee chair still. And
this is not on topic to the discussion at hand. It's a motion to reconsider.
Yeah, but I'm saying since we have to do that still, we still need time to do that today. And if we don't finish this discussion soon, I don't know if we have time for that.
Our treasurer.
Very little of this bill has actually been discussed. There's significant changes in here, including allowing the effective passing of policy unilaterally through resolution, which is, a massive change to how student government has done things. Historically, we've only allowed policy changes through bills, not resolutions. There's changes in here that modify that, right? We're modifying, essentially, through that, our enactment and jurisdiction. We've got various holes in here that haven't been addressed. There's a lot in here that hasn't been touched on at all, and I'm very confused as to, especially considering this is a bill, right? Normally speaking, bills are discussed for 2 weeks. It was marked for immediate attention given, the circumstances with our election, but there's a lot of things in here that have not been discussed whatsoever, so I'm very confused as to why the Senate feels it necessary to immediately vote on this. I yield.
Seeing no further discussion, we're going to go into voting on the motion to reconsider the call to question. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Temp Ludowan. That passes 4-0. Did I miscount that? Okay, now going back into the voting on the call to question. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman. The call to question itself. You just voted yes to reconsider the vote. Okay. Senator Novak and Pro Temp Ludowan. That dies 2-4-0. Moving on to discussion to the bill as a whole, our web representative.
I think I'm going to do this right. Motion to divide question and talk about each article individually like we did with the financial policy.
There is a motion to divide the question. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Capo. Any discussion? Our web representative.
It just seems like we're going round and round around like 13 point and 12 point whatever. I think we should just go individually, go through this, because as it was marked for immediate attention, you guys want this done apparently, and the best way to do this is go one by one and discuss it. As we're getting nowhere. I yield.
Our Vice President.
Well, we have like lines from different articles. Are you counting like all of it? Like how are you counting, I guess?
Like from 7 to 12 to 13 to 14 to like that.
Gotcha.
Our treasurer.
Representative points, right? Some of these changes are contracts. Some of them are how we run our elections. Some of them are just how we do student-wide voting. I don't think it hurts to, give this the thorough discussion it deserves. I yield.
Seeing no Pro Temp Ludowan.
My point, in my opinion, I don't know if it's quite necessary because, like, as the VP said earlier, there are sections that are articles that is just one line. For Article 7. For Article 12, it's not a lot. I know the big ones are Article 13 and Article 14, so to divide the entire bill, even though it's not that long of a bill as well, because it's not like financial policy or the Constitution that's changing everything, I don't see that it's very necessary, but that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I yield.
Our web representative.
Just to go back to that, I get that, but at the same time, financial policy, we spent like 2 seconds on like one of the things that changed everything, which I wish we didn't. But this is just to clarify because looking at people's faces, a lot of y'all look confused as much as I am, not gonna lie. So I think this is our best point of action just to go forward so we can make sure that everything is clarified properly because this is going to change a lot. This is really affecting a lot of people, I'm not gonna lie, and it would be a disgrace if we just gave it up in 2 seconds. I yield.
Our esports representative.
I'm gonna say not as boldly as our web representative expressed their opinion, but like I do think it would be nice if we had clarification on what each article changes, or if no changes were made, just give it entirely.
Seeing no further discussion, we're going to vote on the motion to devise a question by article. Senator Capo, Senator Pena.
Point of order. Was it to divide the question or divide discussion?
Divide discussion. I think that's the right one I'm supposed to do.
I apologize. Divide discussion by article. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Temp Ludowan. That dies 3-3-0. No? Our advisor.
And that's not 2/3?
A check.
While we wait for our advisor, our president.
Could I have senators, when voting, to put your thumbs up and say I approve? It can get a little confusing on what you're voting on because sometimes it's hidden behind the laptop.
At least for me, it's a bit hard to tell the order because people put their
How about
thumbs
we
up.
just do both? You're going to thumbs up, thumbs down, approve or deny.
Point of information. I was just asked to do the thumbs up so that for the recording, sometimes the audio, doesn't happen in time, so we don't actually know if you're just verbalizing like what's voted by each person. So the thumbs up is just so for the camera. So, yeah.
It was to divide the discussion.
And talk about each article individually.
Leave, our web representative, was speaking for a consideration by paragraph is the term from Robert's rules, if that's of help to our advisor. I yield.
If it helps, I don't know what I'm doing. We have to revote. All right, so since that vote ended in tie, we're going to re-vote on the motion to divide the discussion by article. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak. That dies 4-0. 2-4-0, sorry. Back into discussion on the bill as a whole. Pro Temp Ludoan.
Back open forum to 155.
There is a motion to push back open forum to 155, seconded by Senator Capo. Now, our president.
Discussion, right?
Discussion on the motion.
I don't think we should push open forum any further than 150. It has been brought during our executive meeting that the voting of the election chair was not done properly and may have to be redone during the open forum. I yield.
Senator Novak.
With our President, I think we should push it back, but I think we should only push it back to 150.
Pro Temp Ludoan.
Or do I need to?
Can you just rescind it and remake it for
I rescind my motion.
For the ease of my life, Pro Temp Ludoan?
I rescind my motion.
Okay. Pro Temp Ludoan.
Push open forum back to 150.
There is a motion to push the open forum back to 150, seconded by Senator Beckman. Seeing no discussion, we're going to go into voting. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak.
I approve.
Pro Temp Ludoan, that passes unanimously. Open forum is pushed back to 150. Our advisors.
Known if we are looking to redo the election committee chair, several of our voting members have a 2 o'clock class. So the chances of that getting done before they have to get to class on time is probably not going to happen if we push it back to that time. I yield.
Our esports representative.
Wait, are we still in the discussion about the open forum stuff?
No, that passed.
Okay, then can I ask our vice president to just give us a recap of each section since we're not dividing?
Our vice president.
Sure. So I'm just going to kind of go this bullet point by bullet point in the first section here. So 7.5.0, this has to do with terms. Since terms aren't clearly outlined, they're further outlined in the election policy, but this is just to in with that. Only positions that actually have a term limit are really affected by that, but it's just to let you know that, if you resign, you will forfeit a term. 10.9.0 is removed because it's referencing the wrong article numbers and such as that. It also is added on, I believe, later. 12.4.0, this simplifies the sentence. That's about it. 12.5.0, before or during. This is in the cases like the gala last year. It was actually done improperly since it was done during. This is for in the case of separate initiative that isn't a resolution, isn't anything like that, but it can still be put on the agenda. That's why that's there, before or. 12.5.1, again, added later. The entirety of referendums, Article 13 is removed since most of it got split up between both election and referendums. That just the general rewrite of it was entirely needed. That being said, a lot of it is still reflected in the new referendums, almost word for word, if not word for word. In the referendums, we have the minimum percentage is defined for a vote for, some of the bigger decisions going to the whole student body. Besides that, everything else is fairly straightforward. One thing that was changed was it was originally the vice president shall be responsible for ensuring for each election. Now it's stating the election chair, since it shouldn't be the vice president if they step down from the election chair in charge of the candidates on the election, which is the current issue that was brought up earlier. Continuing on from that, the entirety of 14 is clear outline. So we start off with the definition of the election policy and its usage. The 14.1.1 is just saying that before election policy is actually made, since it has to be requested by the vice president to be formed, that the vice president is still allowed to draft an election timeline, election packet, and neutral documents, aka what every student body would interact with that's already public documents, minus the timeline, which is on the election packet. Continuing from there is a definition of what candidacy period looks like, what grace period looks like, what voting period looks like, as it's kind of unclear, especially last year when we had a voting period and a grace period at the same exact time. Want to split that up. 14.2.1 is just an echoing of the Constitution on what, who goes on to what election. 14.2.1.1 is just what current policy is, just moved into this new location. 14.2.2 is, again, just a definition of what can be done during candidacy period, grace period defined in the next point, voting period defined in the following point. 2.5 is explaining for the senator elections that the candidacy period will run simultaneously. 14.2.6 is defining that debate needs to happen during the grace period. As currently in policy, we don't actually have to have a debate, but it's just been precedent, so I felt it was needed to add into policy. 14.3.0 is kind of just how elections are done through a college-wide ballot. Nothing really has changed from current election policy to now in terms of that section. 14.4.0 is defining special elections. Again, not much has really changed in that one. 14.5.0 is the training period. Nothing changed in that one. 14.6.0 is all the restrictions, as this was currently only defined within the candidacy packet and then in differing points and sometimes counteractive points within current election policy. So that's all just in one spot with the additions of the removal from any past or present election. Going on from there was the addition of the student code of conduct. That's not currently outlined that students have to follow student code of conduct, which is a really big problem. Going from there, 14.6.1 is signature sheets, same with 14.6.2. 14.6.3 is referring to the appeals mentioned in 14.6.0 about being allowed to be back added on to a ballot if you were removed previously. 14.6.4 is about removing candidates from the ballot as kind of defined above and as was done last year. 14.7.0 is oath of office, swearing, stuff like that, explanations of how special elections working with that, and the announcements that must be made by the election committee. 14.7.2 is talking about term periods, as it was not clearly identified what a term period was. 14.8.0 is contesting an election. This was slightly updated as the times that are in here now reflect how much time, realistically speaking, election committee and constitutional court can form and still do a special a redone election in the case there is a petition put forward and that it can be done, so we don't have the issue that was brought forward last year where we had to decide if we wanted to do an election over the summer or at the beginning of the year with the Senate. Let's see, continuing on from there, 14.8, no, that was contestation, never mind. 14.9 is submitting headshots. Public figures should have their public faces known on the website. The reason why this was moved from on the candidacy form to on this is because we can't actually require you to present your headshot when you're running for candidacy. If you want to present it yourself, you can, but SGU cannot take that because then there could potentially be bias in a vote based on how you look. But afterwards, if you are voted in, then you should be required to headshot as you're a public figure. 14.10.0 is a valid signature sheet definition, which is kind of the one that was crossed out in before. Going on from there is an update to 22.7.0, which is literally just a rewording since it used to state Student Government Unit Election Commission, which is not a thing, it's election committee. Election committee, like itself, in Appendix E, has been updated to have a required minimum number of members, requiring people to sign a contract, and just general more specifics on exactly what the committee does. The contracts are the contracts. They just need to be re-added in since we've been using them, but because of Bay's policies, as mentioned 2 weeks ago at this point, those are not actually in there under current policy, so they need to be re-added in. The only addition was the election committee member, which is just stating that they can't run in the elections. That way we can't have people who are on the committee and then just suddenly decide to run, kind of like what happened last year. Continue on from there, candidacy form. This needs to be updated with the passing of the previous motion. But this is adding on Chief Justice to it, better formatting, adding on the adherence to Code of Conduct, adding on a fairness clause, an unbiased and fairness clause when they're conducting themselves, changing it from bylaws to Constitution and policy and procedures, as SGU's bylaws or SGA could be referring to SGA's bylaws, which is a whole big legal problem anyway, so that just for better clarification is stated as Constitution. The charter has been completely crossed out because this was actually one of the main problems with conflicting information. Recruitment policy is just small updates, requiring an interview must have an advisor present, so that way decisions can't be made by students. It also has to be made by an advisor. And then acting positions not part of line of succession require an interview. Basically just saying that if it's not part of a line of succession, when they transfer into a position, then if, like, say the person is vacant above them and that position doesn't have a line of succession, they still have to they'll still not have to require, will require an interview, apologies, for the transition to that position. And that's the bill.
Senator Beckman. There is a motion to call to question. Is there a second? Second by Pro Temp Ludoan. Starting with Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Temp.
Clearly stated by all senators.
We're going to redo the vote. Please give your thumbs up and say approve or disapprove when casting your vote. Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Temp Ludoan. That passes 5-1-0. We are now voting on the bill as a whole. Senator Capo, Senator...
Voting on is what was contained in the agenda. That's what was sent out. That's what was on the bill. That's what was on the table as of Sunday. The amendments that were made were never motioned to be put on the table. And once legislation is added...
Maybe on a part of miscommunication, really, on what was within the bills.
Can I ask our advisors for clarification?
What was emailed out is what we would vote on.
All right. Since that call to question has...
To clarify, I apologize, what Forrest
Yes.
sent out after is what we would vote on.
Since the call to question did pass, we are still voting on the bill that was sent out in email earlier this meeting as a whole, starting with Senator Capo, Senator Pena, Senator Rose, Senator Beckman, Senator Novak, Pro Temp Ludoan. We have an abstention that...
The three things restated to me, please.
I can look them up. Does the vice president know off the top of his head?
Personal privilege, lack of information, or I forget the third one. I apologize.
I will say we are now in
Conflict
open
of interest.
forum, so I'm going to hand the chair back to our vice president as we're in open forum. As it is
Alrighty.
1:50, I don't have the gavel, I'm sorry. So I will hand the chair back to our vice president.
I accept. All right, we are now in open forum proper. Senator Novak. I'm going
Because
to ask.
the bill, because it was 501. Yeah, because we voted 501, but we were just asking. The only thing we're holding up on was Pro Temp Ludowan's reason for abstention.
Yeah, the vote is the vote. I'm happy. Of course, we would still want clarification. Kathy has the reasons, so I'll get to that in just a second. But I think that the vote would stand because it was conducted prior to the conclusion of open forum. Do you want to list off the 3 reasons? I yield.
Pro Temp Ludowan to answer their
Lack of information I'd go with at this
Okay.
point.
Treasurer Weddle.
I have a question for our policy committee chair. Under the bill that just passed, it outlines training for senator and executive elections. It doesn't cover training for the Chief Justice or College Counsel. I just was wondering, are they still held to that 2-week training period, or are they just sworn in immediately following the conclusion of the election and then required to go through training prior to assuming their duties? To go to 4.9.0, I understand, I suppose, the rationale behind requiring elected officials to submit public headshots, but that's never been done before, and the fact that this was not discussed whatsoever really on the floor, it was just very briefly touched on by the Vice President. If I could also address the Senate, why does the Senate feel it's necessary for elected officials to submit headshots to election committee when there's nothing outlined for how we're going to be using these headshots? I also just wanted to ask our policy committee chair, in addition to the prior questions, if they could provide the amount of students who have been removed from a past election at SUNY Poly, ran again, because I don't think that was actually ever answered, that question, by our web representative. Additionally, what was the rationale behind allowing students who have been impeached, removed from office, received 3 strikes, to be able to just run again as they are currently allowed to do, whereas candidates removed from an election are not allowed to run again? I just wanted to leave all those questions to our Vice President. I yield.
Sure. So, okay, yeah, sure. So to the policy, as the policy committee chair, right, I'm going to first start off with the headshot one. Was that directed at me or the senators? Because you kind of directed at both. Okay, both. All right, so I'll just answer that on the side of the, yeah. It was in past elections, it's actually been required on the candidacy form. It's asked for headshots. However, we can't ask for that because it could then sway voting based on looks. So, but headshots for a public figure, you're a public face, you're representing people. That was why it was added. This was actually not a change that has happened from now till policy committee, meaning during the public meetings, it could have been definitely discussed. I can't exactly remember all the questions that were directly asked. Briefly, the other points.
Training for Chief Justice and College Counsel, because that's not outlined. It's one of those holes that I mentioned earlier that the Senate didn't look to discuss. The other one was the rationale behind allowing students who have been impeached, received 3 strikes, etc., to just run again for presumably those same positions, whereas candidates who were removed from elections, never held any power, have to go through a pretty rigorous process just to get back on the ballot, which again is an election at the end of the day. I think that was the remaining questions.
Nations, that's already outlined within policy on how many restrictions they have. That usually prevents them from even running as a candidate, which is why that's its own separate thing. Going on from there, the one about training, we aren't in charge of the student council rep. That's a SUNY mandated thing. We don't have a contract or anything for them. So how that works is how that works. As for Chief Justice, yeah, it wasn't discussed on the floor, and it wasn't discussed on the floor. Our president?
Could I entertain, I'm not sure if this is the right procedure to do it, but could I entertain a motion to move into the election of the committee chair?
I have a motion to move into the election of committee chair. I'm Seeing no so heard, so that dies. Senator Novak.
Strike policy today. Underneath strike policy, if you get removed for 3 strikes, you're also allowed to run in the next election. There's no limit. So if you get, say any one of us gets 3 strikes this semester, we can just run next fall or next spring, and there's nothing. Technically speaking, we could run in this spring election if one of us gets removed right now from 3 strikes. There's no limit. You can get 3 strikes, you can still run. There's nothing that prevents people from that from running. I yield.
Pro Temp Ludewan.
Sorry, gathering my thoughts. With all the discussion that is still happening of the bill, I'd like to motion to reconsider that vote on the bill.
A motion to reconsider. Is there a second?
Please.
Yeah. While we still have them, I'm just seeing if there's any
Please.
second. If there's not, then there's not.
Please.
Seeing no second, that motion dies. And we have lost quorum. Alrighty. Well, we've lost quorum.
Okay, now we lost quorum.
Yeah. CFB? You can still do a swear. Please come to the center of the portion.
So you just have to repeat after what I say. When I say state your name, you state your name. When I say state your organization and position, you will state CFB, whatever your position is. CFB Secretary, okay? So please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Will faithfully uphold the student government at Utica Constitution. The student government at Utica Constitution. And carry out the duties of your organization and position of CFB Secretary to the best of my ability, and will represent the students of SUNY Poly in a fair and unbiased manner. Congratulations. You just have to sign your name here.
Good.
So who's our election chair?
Kathy right now.
Great. I still think that bill passed way too fast.